So welcome to another edition of Republican Stronghold, where we've been interviewing candidates in the GOP primary. So today we have with us Thomas Smith. Now, do you prefer to be called Thomas or Tom?
Thomas.
Thomas.
Yep.
And Thomas is running for the Court of Criminal Appeals, place 3. And so I think one of the first things that I like to talk to folks about is, have you run for office before? And even if you have or have not, what brought you to run for this office?
Sure, that's a great question, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yes, I have a couple times. When I was in college, I served for about a year on village council in the little hometown I grew up in Ohio. And then after that, about 15 years ago, I ran for a municipal office in Frisco, unsuccessfully, but I learned a lot. I learned a great deal, and I'm applying those lessons now in this campaign. And to answer the last part of your question, this court is a court that has gotten out of its lane in recent years. My very first job out of law school, I clerked for a judge, the Supreme Court of Ohio, right before I moved to Texas 27 years ago, who was instrumental in reshaping that court and restoring its credibility. It had been plagued by mismanagement, administrative issues, corruption, infighting amongst judges, a lot of political activity. I don't think that the Court of Criminal Appeals has had all of that, but I think it's had some of that. And I think a new, fresh perspective is needed, and that's why I stepped up to run.
So were you the youngest person to serve on that town council when you ran for that position?
I probably was. I succeeded my grandmother, who retired, and it was really something I wanted to do, probably as much to honor her as much as it was to serve. And I found out rather quickly that it was hard for me to do my job and be in college at the same time. And so didn't serve a full term, but that was meaningful experience too.
Right.
And a lot of that meant a lot. And one of the things that spurred me on at a very early age to get involved.
Yeah. Campaigns are very interesting. I've run a few of those myself. I served 10 years in elected office. So you learn a lot with each one that you run. Yeah. I would think running for a statewide office in Texas, as large as it is, has got to have its challenges.
It sure does. The state, as everyone knows, is enormous, and it's hard to physically get everywhere. It's even hard for people with large campaign budgets to get everywhere. Even the governor, lieutenant governor, who have the resources to get on a plane and fly around the state, it's still a challenge for them. So, but imagine what it's like when you don't even have 1/50th of those resources to try and get around the state. So I put 30,000 miles on my trucks in the last 8 months, going to nearly 60 counties across the state, and I've tried to get to each region at least a couple of times, and try to get back to places. I make it a point, especially when I'm in a rural area, to say that I'll come back, because I do want to come back. And if nominee and win the primary, I will go back. I'll go to a lot more counties. Having grown up in a really remote area of Ohio and a small town, those places are meaningful to me, because I know how much we appreciated it anytime a politician or someone running for state office came to our area. So I know how much it means to be in those places.
And those were, because people don't think, they don't see the numbers of votes. And so candidates very often don't think about going to those remote locations. And just for any of our viewers who don't know, Texas has 254 counties. So when Thomas says that he's been to 60, it sounds like a lot, but there's a lot left to go.
There's a lot
left to go. It is difficult. So let's talk about the courts a little bit.
Sure.
I moved here 11 years ago from a state that appoints judges. And the public really has little to no say in those judges. The Supreme Court in New Jersey, they're tenured after 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, if a Democrat appoints a judge, they typically get tenure. They have to do something pretty egregious.
Right.
So when I moved here and I found out that we actually, as voters, had the opportunity to vote for those people who were sitting on the courts, I thought it was pretty exciting. And then I very quickly found out that very few Texans really understand the courts.
Mm-hmm.
So when I've done these interviews, one of the things that I like to talk about is, what does the court do and how is it structured such that who gets there and how do they get there? And I think that's really important because courts do affect, in many ways, people's everyday lives and they don't realize it.
Sure.
So if you could just touch on that some.
Sure. When you say who gets there, do you mean the judges or you mean the type of
types of cases that end up there?
That end
right.
up there, sure. So, well, this is a very unique court in that it's one of only two of its kind in the country, Oklahoma being the other state that has a state Supreme Court for criminal matters only, which is what this court is. And it's also important to understand that it's not just a state Supreme Court that handles criminal law matters in the technical sense. It's also a constitutional law court. So state and federal constitutional issues that come up within a criminal law context would be heard by this court. So in that way, it's very much the equal of the Texas Supreme Court, where constitutional issues would come up in a civil context only. Arguably, there may be more constitutional issues that come up in this Court of Criminal Appeals, because those kinds of issues a lot of times manifest themselves more frequently than in a civil case that could be just a business litigation case or something like that. So because of that, it carries a great deal of importance.
So those would be things like somebody didn't have a proper warrant, that then you had a criminal matter, but that's a constitutional matter.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can have a Fourth Amendment issue, something like that. Yeah. And so because of that, it does carry a lot of importance. And the court itself is enshrined in our Texas Constitution. It's not a creature of the legislative statute. So, and it's been around for over 130 years. And so, the other 48 states, they have a state Supreme Court system that handles both civil and criminal, including the court that I clerked at in Ohio, where they handle all of those matters. But Texas has had this bifurcated system created by the Constitution for a long time.
Well, that seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, just recently, Texas created a 15th Court of Appeals, and people will see some of those judges on their ballot. That 15th Court of Appeals, if I understood it correctly, is primarily to handle business cases. So you can really focus better than if you're, jack of all trades dealing with civil. Right. Everything gets into, such detail anymore that I think that makes a lot of sense. And Texans are very lucky to be able to vote for the judges and justices that sit on those courts.
Sure. That's a very important point. Some states have appointed judges, like you referenced in New Jersey. Other states elect their judges. And I am a fan of electing judges.
Right.
I'm a fan of having judicial officers in the state context be accountable to voters. Absent that, I think, especially in this day and age, you're asking for a lot of problems. We could take Harris County for an example, where the governor's talked a lot about radical judges on the bench there, freeing people who go back out and commit more violent crimes. Just imagine if those judges were not accountable at the ballot box.
Correct.
It would be even harder to make the kinds of changes that he's talking about. And so I think that sometimes people think about judges and they think, well, maybe we should appoint them because a lot of people, when they vote, they don't know who they're voting for and that kind of thing. The problem with that is it's not the voters. Voters want to be informed. Voters want to know more about every candidate. They definitely want to know more about judicial candidates. Right. I would argue it's been the candidates that, and then judges some judges, not all, but some judges, after they get elected, they kind of disappear in the chambers until it's time to run for re-election.
Right.
I think we're obligated as judicial candidates, and then once we're on the bench, to stay connected to the voters. That's, you all elect us.
Right.
So part of that deal is that, we need to be connected to you and be out around the state, or if it's a local judgeship in a community, in a county, continually, and to stay connected to the voters so people know what you're doing,
right.
so that they see you. And so, that one thing alone would make judicial elections in Texas so much better,
right.
if we did more of that.
Well,
and
I think
if I'm
that's
elected, I'll certainly do it.
Well, that's great to hear, because that's one of the reasons that we like to do this. We had 2 JPs here, mm-hmm. and it was fascinating to listen to what they do, and they were very appreciative because we gave them 20 minutes to
sure.
sit down and talk about what they do, and they say typically they get at a candidate forum and they get 3 minutes to introduce themselves, right. and then they sit down. And that's very difficult for the public because there are so many different levels.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about when you talked about what goes on in the background and maybe judges who, have difficulties with other judges. Can we just, not talking about that specifically, but the structure of how that court functions? How many are there clerks assigned to each of the justices? What happens when a case goes up? Are there secretaries? Are there, what's that administrative structure that ultimately gets you what you need as a judge on that court?
Sure. So generally speaking, being an appellate court and a high appellate court, most of the issues that come before the court we're asked to look at on a discretionary basis, meaning we can pick and choose what cases to hear and what matters to take up. One big exception to that would be death penalty cases. Those are mandatory reviews for this court. So a death penalty case will happen in a county, say Bastrop County, and then in this area it would go up to the third district court of appeals, right. and then it would go up to the Court of Criminal Appeals, and that's a mandatory review before the case enters the federal system for the habeas review process, and then sometimes it'll come back, to our court near the end of the process years later. But so generally, that's kind of the way the cases would shake out. Now, in terms of how those cases are handled internally, there are 9 judges on the court. Each judge has a head research attorney and a law clerk and an administrative assistant, generally speaking, for each judge assigned specifically to them. Then there is a central pool of lawyers that work for the court, not for any individual judge. And so they're there to provide support in terms of managing the docket and caseload as well. I would point out that one of the issues with this court has been that it's the busiest appellate court in the country. And cases that were previously being decided an average of 170 days about a decade ago are now taking over 500 days.
Wow, that's decide. 2 years.
Yes, that's a long time. And
that's to ultimately get to the decision.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. Now, some of that was triggered by, in fairness to the court, some of that was triggered by COVID, but we're 6 years past COVID now, and the court's still grappling with that. And I know the presiding judge has had some interesting ideas about doing things like 3-judge panels to hear lower level motions or things that can be disposed of without having the whole court be involved, so they can work through that process and get back to a more normal level of case management, because it doesn't serve taxpayers well to have cases sitting that long. It doesn't serve the state of Texas, and it especially doesn't serve people who have been convicted of something and could be sitting in a prison somewhere waiting to have their day in court. It's just being delayed that much longer. Right. So I really hope, judicial candidates, especially for high courts, have boundaries. You can't talk about future cases and things like that. But this is an administrative issue, and I can speak freely about that.
Right.
I will happily do anything and entertain any idea that the presiding judge or any of the other judges have to help make that better, because that there's really no excuse for that to be going on now 6 years after COVID. And I really think that that could be dealt with fairly quickly. And let me give you one other thing about that. State high courts typically have a term like the U.S. Supreme Court. They typically hear cases from October to June, and then they'll put out decisions at the end of June, and then they'll have another term the following fall. This court's been hearing cases all year long because they're so busy, and we need to be doing that until we get the docket,
caught up, right?
Until we get caught up. But that's a significant issue that exists on this court now.
So how are the decisions made on the discretionary cases? Does the entire group of 9 judges get together and say, well, we want to take this and we don't want to take this, or is it assigned to 1, 2, or 3 of the judges? Like, how is that done? If my case were to come up to the court, how does that happen, whether you decide to take it or not?
The rules are similar to other courts, for instance, the U.S. Supreme Court, where it takes a certain number of justices to agree to accept a case once a writ has been filed. So that's the way that it works here. And I think in terms of issues, what you would look for are there significant enough legal issues that warrant the state's highest criminal court hearing this case and reviewing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a matter of if the Regional Court of Appeals got it right or not. There could be an issue where maybe the court didn't get it right, maybe the regional court didn't get it right, but wasn't a significant enough issue for us to take up now, or there's no conflict from another regional court that this court needs to resolve. So there are a lot of things that come into play. The legal issues are part of that, but they really need to be significant enough for this court to say, yes, we want to hear this case.
So if I'm a lawyer and I don't know all the terminology, but if I want my case to be heard by your court, do I have to identify those legal issues that I think are important?
Yes.
And can you yourselves read that case and say, well, the lawyers only brought us A, B, C, and D, but in looking at the material, I think there's an issue here, issue E, and we'd like to take it up to deal with that. Do you have that discretion to do that?
Yes. Judges can do that. This court can do that. The court that I worked at previously, we did that. We actually had an interesting case. It wasn't in a criminal context, but it's worth mentioning in that we had a case when I was a clerk there that dealt with tax preemption and whether local municipalities, if they wanted to tax an entity, say a utility, that meant that the legislature could not do that, that local authorities had that governing authority, and vice versa if the legislature hadn't passed a specific statute. And what the issue was the courts in Ohio had created this judicial doctrine of tax preemption, implied preemption, not explicit preemption by the legislature, but implied judicial preemption based on this 70-year, 80-year doctrine of law. And the case came up to us, and the attorneys really hadn't briefed the issue of whether or not that whole doctrine shouldn't have been created to begin with. And our court looked at it and thought, courts shouldn't be involved in this. If the legislature wants to preempt taxes, they can do so by passing a statute and doing it. So we rendered a decision throughout that judicially created body and said, if the legislature wants to do this, they need to pass an explicit statute to do that. And by the way, that's the proper area for this area of tax policy, because the people elect the legislature and not the courts.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Let's talk about you specifically, your background, and what you think you bring to the table.
Sure.
In this court and in these issues that arise.
Sure. So I'm not a prosecutor, and my experience has been a combination of civil practice, government service, criminal justice policy, and so it's very much a very background, kind of similar to our presiding judge on this court, David Shank, who practiced for a long time in the civil arena. We practiced at the same law firm, Jones Day, together. And then he eventually became a judge, and then now he's the presiding judge. But what I would say is this, is that this court has struggled with having a lot of people on it with the same kind of experience. We have 6 people on this court who have been assistant DAs. We have 3 people on this court who have been criminal defense lawyers. Historically, it's been populated by people with those backgrounds. And I'm not criticizing those backgrounds. That is solid experience to have. However, if you get too many people in one body with the same kind of experience, you're asking for groupthink, and that can lead to a lot of bad decision making over time. And then also, you don't have anybody out there with a more broad perspective of what criminal justice law should look like, or how to approach constitutional issues. And I think that's where I come in. For instance, I spent a lot of time in the AG's office actually writing legislation that became law. I was one of 2 lawyers that wrote our state's sanctuary cities law to make sure it was constitutional and that it got through the Texas House and the Senate, and it has held up today. The other lawyer that worked
meaning
on
that we shouldn't have them.
Meaning that sanctuary cities are banned, yes.
Just want to clarify
that they're banned, and that there is a process by which people can file complaints to challenge jurisdictions that may be doing that. And so not only is it constitutional, but it's a very interesting law in that we set up a citizen complaint process. You could file a complaint if you felt like Bastrop or any area in which you live was operating a sanctuary jurisdiction. Anybody can do that, and it triggers an automatic investigation by our office. I also helped write our state's current online solicitation law, prohibiting that activity by child predators going after kids online. Mm-hmm. That's important because this court threw out our previous law governing this in 2013 as a violation of the First Amendment. And we could talk about why they made that decision, but the state of Texas went 18 months without having a law that could be prosecuted.
Wow.
For online solicitation of minors.
Wow.
And 12 years later, last October, this court, the most recent example being last October, this court has continued to grant relief to sex offenders that were convicted under the old law, despite the fact there is Supreme Court precedent that would give the court an off-ramp to stop doing that. And we could talk more detail about that. So, having participated in the process of actually writing legislation, you understand really quickly how ill-equipped judges are to rewrite it on the bench. Because when you go through draft after draft after draft, and you get to the final product and it's signed into law by the governor, you understand that to get to that point, the words that come out and are a final product and are codified in the law, they carry special meaning because of all that they've had to go through
to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think this court could benefit from that. Someone who's had that experience and someone who can speak to that. And so maybe when judges are kind of getting out of their lane, they're like, well, I don't think this phrase means this or this phrase means that. It's like, well, wait a minute. I have the experience to know how that law got to that point. And so I can tell you that generally speaking, courts owe a lot of deference to the final product that comes out because the words mean what they mean and they don't mean what they don't mean.
That's interesting. So are you allowed to only deal with the law that is being challenged, or are you allowed to bring in any testimony, any committee reports, things like that the legislature used in order to create that law, so you can really dive into what was the meaning of that?
All of those things are public record, so you can look back through every phase of the process if that's what you want to do. I would advise caution in doing that as a judge, because if you start to go down that road, you can convince yourself sometimes pretty quickly, well, I mean, 3 drafts prior to the final product, you know, this happened and this happened, so maybe there's an inference we can draw from. Like you start
like
to
how far down that rabbit hole do you go?
Yeah, when you can start drawing those inferences and conclusions from multiple drafts, and then all of a sudden you've gotten so far away from what the final product is. That's what makes it really hard for judges to engage in that process, rather than looking at what actually comes out of the legislature and is signed into law.
Right. Yeah. Now, as judges, if you see something, I know, we don't want our judges legislating from the bench, but if you see something that clearly needs a fix, as a judge, do you go to the governor, the legislature, anybody to say, whoa, this really needs a fix?
I don't think that's our role. If something is so far out of line that it violates the Constitution, or it'll get challenged rather quickly.
You'll get it as a case.
Yeah, you'll get it as a case.
So you'll be able to deal with it that way.
Yeah.
Now that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I really love talking about all this. There was a point in time that I sat on a planning board for 8 years, and planning board looked at me, the attorney, and he said, if you want to go to law school, I'll sponsor you. And I said, no, I'm going to be that little old lady that's 60 years old with the gray hair sitting in the back of the room in law school.
Right.
Well, I'm a little bit beyond the 60 years, and I never did the law school thing, but I always found it so fascinating, to look at what does the legislature mean when they're passing a statute, and words do matter. Mm-hmm. We just had a couple of us had a conversation with TxDOT, and they were saying, well, we're not doing any more, two-way feeder roads. And we were looking at a particular map, mm-hmm. and I said to them, well, so this one goes this way. Well, what if the county put one right next to it going the other way? It's sort of a 2-lane road, but it's not really, and let's just not call it a feeder road. It's a county road.
Right.
And so, we all got a chuckle out of that and talked about how words really do matter when you're describing, the various things that impact you. So the last question that we've been asking candidates is that when the voters go in the voting booth, when they go to vote, what is it that you want them to remember about you to cause them to cast a vote for you?
Sure. That's a great question. So, first of all, this is a Republican primary, and that counts for something. That counts, and it matters for judicial candidates just as it does for every other candidate. Mm-hmm. So, I've been a lifelong conservative Republican. My grandfather was a delegate for Barry Goldwater in 1964.
Wow.
I grew up in the Republican Party, and my grandmother got me involved and took me to Republican Women's Club's meetings, and I kind of went from there. And my mom was a history teacher, and so with all of that, I got involved at a really early age. I was a page at the '88 Republican Convention. I've been a delegate to a national convention, been a state convention delegate, precinct chair, and I think that matters in a Republican primary. Mm-hmm. That people need to know that not only are they voting for someone who would serve well on the bench from a legal perspective, but they also have a solid, dependable Republican who's been involved, who understands what the Republican Party is all about, and who's been involved with it really my whole adult life. And particularly the last 10 years working in the Texas AG's office. And that kind of brings me to the second thing, which is we live in pretty difficult times.
Yeah, we do.
They're challenging and hard and dangerous. I think we live in the most dangerous time we've lived in since the late 60s. And voters need to take that into account. Especially when they're voting for judges because we've seen the damage that activist judges can do. We've seen the damage that unreliable judges that we thought we were voting for to get somebody dependable, and then they turn around and let us down. I mean, so this court included, and that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I want voters to know is that they're going to get somebody that they can count on, and they have somebody who has a lifelong history in the Republican Party, a track record in the AG's office of actually getting things done that matter, conservative victories, and working, in an office, maybe the premier office across the United States, that's consistently fought against radical judges and radical DAs for years. And so when I'm on the bench, when someone walks into the courtroom, when the next AG walks into the courtroom,
Mm-hmm.
Who do they want hearing that case on the other side? Do they want someone who, all of us, my opponents who are great people and they're good lawyers, I think one of the things that separates me is the fact that I'm a lifelong conservative. So when the next AG walks in to argue a case, voters who elected me will know that's somebody I can count on there to not get out of their lane and not legislate from the bench and not do things that let Republicans down.
It's interesting. I write a little blog, and I wrote one time about the word conservative. It's very hard for the voters because in a Republican primary, everybody is calling themselves conservative because they know that is important to the voter. I think that the issue of activist judges is a critical one, and you use that terminology.
Mm-hmm.
We had a little presentation here at our last meeting on, the questions on the ballot that are opinion questions for the GOP. Mm-hmm. And we went through all those opinion questions where people can, I like this, I don't like this, I agree with this. And the very last slide that I put up was the Democrat questions. And I would urge the voters to go take a look at the Democrat sample ballot to see what those opinion questions are. And when you do, think about how different things would be decided if the judiciary who had to deal with the validity of that legislation were Democrats who probably voted yes on all those questions, or the majority of those questions, versus Republicans who predominantly would have voted yes on those opinion questions.
Right.
And that was a real eye-opener for a lot of people, that these are, I think there were 13 or 14 of them on the Democrat side, and you just looked at them and you went,
sure,
whoa, that's like not the society with the rules and regulations that I'd really like to live in. So, I think when you raise that issue of activist judges, what got me in the political world in the first place was when the New Jersey Supreme Court appointed judiciary, a bunch of liberals, ruled that every single municipality, and there were 566 of them, in the state of New Jersey had to build their fair share of low and moderate income housing. Yeah. And we all got assigned numbers, and we all got told exactly what we were going to do. My particular town had a master zoner applied to the town. We used to call it Thursdays with David. We'd go in while he literally laid out where all this low and moderate income housing was going in every single New Jersey municipality. Mm-hmm. So you look at something like that, and that's the judiciary making law.
Yep.
And man, there's a difference between that and a conservative judiciary who really believes in the rule of law.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
absolutely. And let me make your example a little bit scarier. Hopefully it's not like this, but we could be in a really difficult environment in November. Where the Democrats are really active. They're coming for us in Texas. And so there's nothing they would like more than to win a statewide office for the first time in 32 years. And arguably, one of the easiest ones, or one of their best opportunities, could be one of these down ballot judicial races, where they might be able to sneak somebody in, and it would be worldwide news. They would have this much of a foothold, for the first time in 3 decades. And we absolutely cannot let that happen.
Right.
We have to have great candidates that are working hard, not just after primary, but we'll start working hard and work all the way to the finish line in November, so we can make sure that doesn't happen. And what is really troublesome about that is that the last time we had an environment that was kind of like this was 2018, and we wiped out a lot of Republicans at the regional court of appeals level.
Yeah, Third Court of Appeals, gone.
Yeah, 700 years of legal knowledge was wiped out in one election across the state.
Yep.
Now, we've gotten a lot of those spots back, but we can't afford to lose those spots we've gained back, and we sure can't afford to lose a statewide judicial office to a Democrat. So we've got to have really good general election candidates that can take it to the Democrats, because if they were to ever get a foothold, then that's just broadening things up to the kinds of things that you just cited.
Absolutely.
And so.
And I'll go back to that housing issue. Senator Cory Booker came right out of Newark, and my town sent half of our number to Newark.
Yeah.
That was allowed when you had a number assigned that you could build part of it in the inner cities. Yeah. We paid to build housing in the inner city. So Cory Booker is very familiar with that housing, and he has tried very hard under the Biden administration to push that. And if that came down federally,
yep,
Texas is going to be subject to that same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And I keep a spreadsheet of all the races and all the candidates, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that every single statewide candidate has Democrat opponents, including the judicial.
That's correct.
Yeah, yes. Every single one.
Yes, we all do.
Yeah. Yep. So
full slate.
That is a critical point to remember. We're electing the Republican that we want to sit in these positions, but we also have to elect the Republican that can win in November.
That's correct.
So that's really critical, and we're going to have to work really hard on that.
I think so. Probably have to triple the number of counties I've been to. That's okay. That's all right.
Well, let's see. You said 60, so if you triple, that's
180.
180. You're getting there.
Maybe I get to all 254.
And I do believe, aren't there a couple of counties that have like 2 residents?
Yeah.
So okay. So we won't count those into the mix. Yeah. So if there's anything else you'd like to add, that's pretty much what we do at these interviews, so that the public gets an opportunity to get to know you.
Sure. Well, first of all, y'all need to give the Lost Pines Republican women credit for doing this. This is a valuable thing for any candidate, but especially for candidates that are running for a judicial office or a lesser known office to get more than 3 minutes to speak. And so y'all deserve a lot of credit for doing that, and really appreciate it quite a bit. The other thing I would say is that I just reemphasize about this being a Republican primary, especially with people voting right now. Experience is what you've done, but it's also what you haven't done. And so I appreciate my opponents, but unlike them, I've never worked for a Democrat. Unlike 2 of them, I've never worked for a Democrat. I don't know what that's like. I'd rather starve than work for a Democrat.
Yeah.
I'd rather beat them in November.
Yeah.
And so.
So which 2 are those that work for the Democrat?
Would be Mr. Coffey and Ms. Fox.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so.
All right. Well, that's something to keep in mind.
So, and that's important for people to know, because I think people need all the information that they possibly can when they're going to vote for any candidate, but especially a judicial race. And then, I think that, again, the whole point of a Republican primary is to select the best candidate for a general election. And, I would like nothing more than to be that person, so I could take it to my Democrat opponent in the fall and run them around the state of Texas. So,
there you go. Yeah.
And then also, after that, more importantly, to be the kind of judge that Texas conservatives and Republicans in the state of Texas can be really proud of.
Good. Great. Well, we appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
I know we're only doing these here locally, so sometimes for a candidate that gets a little difficult, but we like to do the one-on-one face-to-face, and we appreciate very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you so
luck.
much. Appreciate
Thanks so
it.
much.
All right.
And that's a wrap for this edition of Republican Stronghold. We hope you enjoyed this, and we'll view the other candidate interviews that we've done so that you are an informed voter. Thanks so much.